Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody. Yes, it's a bit confusing. I still have an Aussie accent, determined not to lose that. And we live in Atlanta, Georgia, in the United States. Been there for 13 years. I'm not sure if you know much about the church, the spiritual state of the church in the United States, but we live in Atlanta. They call that the capital of the Bible Belt. That whole southeast corner in the United States is very conservative, very Christian, etc. So that's important for you to know, because as we go along today, I'm going to be sharing some of the things that we see happening over there. And they're exactly the same things we see happening in the church in New Zealand and in Australia as well. But our ministry, I'm one of 7 speakers I have in the office there. And regularly we speak, on average, about 320 to 330 churches every year in the US we go out to visit. And one of the reasons we go to churches is to take information, the exciting information about biblical creation. And that information you're not going to hear about in your public libraries, public schools, etc. Some of the information you would have seen as you walk through the doors on those book tables. Let me just say, I'm not here to sell you a bunch of books. That's not how our ministry operates. We're actually a faith-funded ministry. Just mums and dads like yourself who donate to us to produce information and take it out to where Christians are, for 2 major reasons. Firstly, so you can equip yourselves and your family with the information. And secondly, so you can fulfill the Great Commission, reach others, evangelism with that information. One of the great sources of information we have is our website. Our website actually has now over 15,500 articles, and it's all free. You could type up in the search engine, for example, what about carbon-14 dating? I don't have time to talk about that. People think it proves millions of years. It actually doesn't, etc. So our ministry has been in operation now for about 44 years. So essentially you've got 44 years worth of creation information on that site. And if you've got a pen, I'll give you the web address, because I know how bad Kiwis are at remembering things. So here we go. But actually, I think you could remember that web address, right? Creation.com. So, when you watch one of those nature documentaries on the TV or the news and they go, wow, look, we found this fossil, in Africa. And here is evidence that, humans evolved from ape-like creatures 2 million years ago, they say. Where would you go for information like that? Your own pastors, obviously, are not scientists, and that's why a specialist organization like CMI can help. And within a few days, we'll have an article on our website. And we want to do something today, to save you time during the service. Obviously, we're very, very busy during the changeover. We have a free email newsletter called InfoBytes. And here's an example of how you can use it. Do you remember Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, right? His zoo is actually just a couple of hours north of our Brisbane office in Australia. We have 7 offices around the world, including right here in New Zealand, and our New Zealand CEO, Andrew Mulcahy, is with us today. So I'm a guest of your local New Zealand office. But when he was killed by that stingray, lots of people contacted our website and said, well, why does a God of love design stingrays that kill people? How would you answer that? See, for the non-believer, they see nature red in tooth and claw, as the poet Tennyson said, bad things happening. Why would a God of love allow those things? In fact, I suspect that is the number one question you get as Christians. Some of you have, or when you share with others. So we wrote an article called The Stingray of Death, put a link in there, put a paragraph in our email news, send it out to folks like you on our electronic mailing list. You read it, equip yourselves and your family, and then in this digital age, you just forward it. And that's all you have to do. You see, I always say to people, it's not our job to save people. I find that very liberating when I know that I'm just called to be a faithful witness. It's God that does the saving, ladies and gentlemen. But we can share information. And these questions, like the one I just mentioned, they're intellectual stumbling blocks to people believing in the truth claims of the Bible. And the reason I use this, by the way, is because within 10 days, that became the most visited article ever on our website. And that showed us that people were sharing the information because of something that was in the news, a major event that was in the news. So my colleagues are going to pass around some sign-up sheets. If you want to get our email news, just need your name, your postcode, and your email address up there. And if you could pass them along, pass them back, give everyone an opportunity. And when you've finished, could you please keep them up in the air, hold them up, and the guys will pick them back up off you because we'll need them at the end of the talk. And I'll get on with the talk while that's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, this issue of creation evolution is not about science. And I've depicted the battle here like two trees. The Lord Jesus spoke a lot about trees and fruit. Certain trees are going to produce, obviously, fruit according to their nature. Now, if you look at the screen, please, look at the tree on the left-hand side. That's called humanism. What is humanism? Humanism is a belief system that mankind, humans, we are the ultimate authority in this world. You can make up your own rules about life. Now, why do people believe that? Well, have a look at the soil that tree is planted in evolution. Evolution is a concept. 13.8 billion years ago, there was a big bang, and time and chance produced everything we see, including you and I. Therefore, there's no God, no creator to be accountable to. And if people subscribe to that as their belief system, their worldview, well, what type of fruit do you think they might produce? Well, look at some of the problems there, that we're dealing with in the church. Racism, abortion, gay marriage, euthanasia, gender identity. We can keep adding to it. But I submit to you, folks, they're actually not the problems. They are the fruit of, or the symptoms, if you like, of an underlying foundational problem, which is humanism with its roots in evolution. Compare that to the tree on the right-hand side, the tree of Christianity. Everything you and I need to know about the Christian faith, the nature of God, our need for salvation, where do we get that information from? The Bible. The Bible is a history book of what God created, what went wrong, and why we need to be saved. And the New Testament authors, ladies and gentlemen, most of our church doctrine today, our New Testament doctrine, comes from the fact that the New Testament writers believed these events to be history. That's what they were referring to. Over 100 times the New Testament authors referred to the book of Genesis. Jesus himself referred to the book of Genesis on 16 occasions. He quoted about a real Adam and Eve, a real global flood, and so on. And see, if we subscribe to that as our worldview here, right, we believe that God is creator, we should produce fruit in accordance with that. We'll believe in the sanctity of life. Abortion's wrong. Human beings were made in his image. We will love one's neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor today? Well, you can imagine I live in the States where we've got a lot of race issues going on at the moment. And I say to Christians, your neighbor is actually the black American who lives over the road or the American Indian that lives next door. Because we're living in the genetics revolution, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know, scientifically, in our DNA, we are over 99.9% genetically alike. All human beings on this planet, the alleged racial differences are less than 0.1% of our genome. The genome is the library of information on our DNA. And why is that important? Because it shows that all human beings could have descended from an original human couple, just like the Bible says. This is an exciting time, I tell you, to be a Bible-believing creationist. This type of information we did not have 30 years ago when I first started in ministry. And here's a key point. Most people believe in evolution because that's all they've ever been taught. I stand before you as a former evolutionist, just like my scientific colleagues in the ministry. And I can't emphasize this enough, even though it sounds obvious, because it's not perhaps, or maybe in the universities or the schools, your children will be taught evolution tomorrow. They will be taught evolution as a scientific fact. So think about it. If we know that in advance, respectfully, shouldn't we be doing a little bit more at home and in the church? Because that anti-God view undermines the very, very first thing that the Bible says in the beginning, God created the heaven. If he's not the creator as described in the Bible, where does the truth begin in Scripture, ladies and gentlemen? Does it start in the New Testament? Well, the New Testament refers to the Old Testament, as I said. And so our beliefs about where we came from ultimately affect our worldview. Our worldviews are like a set of glasses or lenses through which all of us, even our children, once they reach the age of understanding, they've pretty much already developed a worldview for themselves already. And our worldviews, as I said, come from a belief about where we came from. Think about it. If evolution's true, tell me, is there any ultimate meaning and purpose to our lives? No, we're just evolved pond scum, right? What about what happens to you when you die? No life after death. But if the Bible's true, God is creator, you and I were created with meaning and purpose in his image. Oh, and the decisions we make in this life, they're going to affect where we spend eternity. But do you realize the answers to questions 2 and 3, right? Why are we here? Where do we go? Will always be determined by what you think about number 1. Where did I come from? And the only 2 games in town are creation or evolution. And I have to give you some bad news before I give you the good news. And one of the reasons I mentioned kind of the state of the church in the United States, you know, we attend actually a Southern Baptist church. And do you know, the largest evangelical denomination in the United States, 47,000 churches. And that's just one denomination. And Barna Research is a Christian research organization. Some of you may have heard of them. They've been surveying the church for many years. Pastors worldwide use the stats from their church surveys. And they did a confidential survey of Christian teens across the church America-wide a few years ago. Now, let me preface this. When I say confidential, these children were told they could give their results confidentially. So we're sitting in Christian families, sitting in our pews, and confidentially they revealed that only 1 in 3 of them intended to continue attending church after they left home. That's shocking, isn't it? They were sitting out there, and intellectually they'd already said, when I'm old enough, I'm out of here. I'll show you more about that later, because guess what? We have similar statistics in this country and in Australia and every Western country as well, ladies and gentlemen. Well, let's lighten it up a little bit. Here's some students, and one says to the other, you seem a bit down. That science class of yours went for ages. What happened? Well, teacher says we're nothing special. We came from pond scum. We're just evolved apes. So she says, what are they teaching you in your next class? And she says, self-esteem. So many a true word spoken in jest, right? So think about it. If you teach children they've come from nothing, they're going to nothing, or we're just evolved animals, I suppose you shouldn't be surprised when people act like it, right? Well, what are we going to do about the science? Okay, because yes, I want to believe Gary, but you know, we're told evolution is science. Just that word, science, I think when most of us think about it, what we actually think about is the type of science that gives us, you know, technology like laptops and sends man to the moon. But that's a very well-defined area of science we might call operational or experimental science. That contrasts with events that allegedly happened in history, both creation and evolution, we put into the category of historical science. Let's take a closer look at this, because operational science deals with experiments you can do in the present. You can repeat those experiments. You can observe the results. If I wanted to do a test to test the boiling point of water today, I could do it tomorrow, keep doing it, get the same result. But then I noticed when I boiled water, a gas escaped, steam. So I develop a hypothesis. Oh, I could capture that steam to drive a wheel. And then I could add copper wires. And that's why technology gets better, because you keep building upon the former experiments. But what about the idea that dinosaurs, you know, grew feathers and evolved into birds 65 million years ago? Anybody see that? Can you test it? Can you repeat it? No. And some of you are thinking, that's because evolution is just a theory. It's actually not a good argument to say that, because in the scientific world, in the universities, a scientific theory actually has experimental support. So for example, you know, we could call it the theory of gravity. So there you go. Did you observe that? I'm going to repeat it. Let's test it. Gravity really works. And the reason I mention that, ladies and gentlemen, is because evolution is actually less than a scientific theory. It's a belief system, a worldview, a philosophy about the past to explain everything that we see today. And I remember mentioning this in a church. My first tour of South Africa years ago, you always remember these types of events because this young man literally came charging up the center aisle very angrily to get in my face at the end of the meeting. And he said, you know, you creationists, you bang on about operational science, he says, and you ignore examples of it. I said, what do you mean? He goes, fossils. Boy, if I had $1 for every time somebody raised fossils, I'd be a very rich man. Fossils, he says, take millions of years to slowly form. Therefore, your idea, he says, of a young earth, I prefer to call it the biblical age of the earth, that's where we get the time frames from, he said, is blown out of the water by the very science you just spoke about. So I showed him this picture. This is an extinct marine reptile known as an ichthyosaur. And what's really neat about it, have a look there. That's the baby coming out of the birth canal. Now, mums, some of you may have had very, very slow, hard, difficult labors with your children, but can you imagine slowly giving birth over millions of years while you were slowly being fossilized there? No? See, when you see that picture, intuitively you know that something rapid, something dramatic had to happen to it in the process of giving birth to preserve it in the rock layers. And we have billions of fossils that are almost like action scenes like this. Perfectly preserved fossils. Fish, for example. Now here's a picture from my grade 11 biological science textbooks, very famous ones, these in Australia. And this is how they explain how fossils are formed. By the way, you've got these at primary school age now in this country. So there's the fish on the left-hand side, and he's swimming along, and he dies, and he sinks to the ocean floor. Now, I just believed that for years. But does anybody now realize where's the first mistake? Do fish generally sink to the bottom when they die? They usually float, don't they? Some of you are looking at me like deer in the headlights, don't know. Have you got any goldfish at home, tropical fish? Put a teaspoon of cyanide in your fish tank tonight and find out whether they sink or float when they die, all right? So in the real world, what happens? Generally, a fish would float, but it's going to get predated upon, isn't it? Very quickly. It's going to get eaten. Maybe the carcass would sink to the bottom, but after a couple of days, you'd be lucky if you have a piece of backbone left. But notice what it's saying. While that fish is lying on the ocean floor, look at the high mountains in the center on the right-hand side. They've disappeared. That's a concept, boys and girls, you're going to hear in higher education called uniformitarianism. The present is the key to the past. The slow erosion rates we see today must have been carrying on like that for millions of years in Earth's history. And what it's suggesting, look, is that sediments, as the mountains erode, are carried out, bury the fish. The chemicals in the sediments permeate the fish, turn it to a piece of rock, into a fossil, and then the process starts again. And that's how we get that geologic column that we see in our biology and geology textbooks. But folks, how do you get a fossil like that using that process? You can't. It's not how the real world works. What you need, here's old Freddy Fish swimming along, you're going to need a lot of mud, a lot of sediment over a short amount of time. You can bury the fish quickly in those layers, and before long, you can get yourself a rapid fossil. Now, you're looking there and you're saying, yeah, that's a bit simplistic. Yes, it's the process of permineralization, fossilization, where the organic material is replaced. That's what takes a long, long period of time. But it actually doesn't. Everybody knows that fossils can be formed very, very quickly. Like this one, this was a soft felt miner's hat, actually buried in a volcanic explosion here in New Zealand, the Tarawera eruption in 1886. This cabin was buried, and 20 years later they uncovered it, and this hat, along with other artifacts in the cabin, had turned into pieces of solid rock in less than 20 years. You just need the right set of conditions to get a rapid fossil, the right cementing conditions. Here's one from my home state of Western Australia, right up in the far northwest, the outback. The owner of a caravan park, he saw this solid rock ring in the sand at low tide, and he shipped it down to us in Perth where we were living. Anyone want to have a guess what you think it was? Yeah, everybody says a tire, but check this out. It was a roll of fossilized fencing wire, and you can even see the individual strands of wire. Then he remembered years before the workers going through, throwing the old rolls in the ocean, hoping they would decay. You just need the right set of cementing conditions. And here's another one, and I like to point out at this point, notice the Creation magazine in the corner. That's my attempt at subliminal advertising, all right? Because that's where all this stuff comes from. Easy to understand lay information that you generally don't see in the secular media. But a family walking along a beach in Australia noticed that rock on the ground, said it was a little different to the others, kicked it over and got a surprise because in the rock was a toy car. So fossils can form quickly under the right conditions. Rocks can form quickly under the right conditions. But I'm going to show you it's the rocks with the fossils in them, ladies and gentlemen, that is used as supposed evidence for deep time upon the earth, millions of years, and evolution. But I've just shown you examples where under the right conditions they can form quickly. So here's the big issue. Most of us want to believe in the Bible, but we struggle with the idea that the earth might only be thousands of years old. We're told it's billions or even millions. And when I talk to Christians, the reason is most of us don't know where they get the idea of millions of years from. So this is very important. It comes from an interpretation of the world's geologic layers. And I'm going to use the Grand Canyon because something we're all very familiar with. Now, can you see in the canyon there are these alternating bands, light, dark, etc. That's called geologic strata. And in the strata, often you'll find these very, very thin layers, maybe 1 or 2 millimeters thick, and they're called sedimentary layers. Sedimentary layers means that sediments are washed in through erosion, like I showed you before, or blown in by the wind, and they settle, and one layer equals a year. So when they look at the Grand Canyon, there are hundreds of millions of layers in that canyon, and they assume they're looking at hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history, geologic time. And who's heard stories like this? The Colorado River wound its way through the canyon and eroded it over tens of millions of years, looking at current erosion rates. We've all heard stories like that, right? Well, I'm going to show you something now that was pivotal for me. I became a Christian, but I was an evolutionist. I was trying to add millions of years in the Bible to fit my science. And I went along to a lecture to hear about the volcanic eruption in Mount St Helens in 1980 up in Washington State, the Northwest. Very famous event. You can go and watch this on YouTube, and there are documentaries out there. But they knew it was going to erupt. Look how it was venting at the top. There were mini earthquakes happening. They knew it was going to explode. And when it did, look, it didn't blow its top, it blew its side. 1/3 of the volcano erupted, and it blew lumps of rock as big as a city block over 10 kilometers from the blast site. But you know what, folks? This is just a baby when we consider some of the geologic events that have happened in Earth's history. And in the aftermath of the initial eruption, it laid down bands of strata. See that? Just like we see at the Grand Canyon. There's a lady at the bottom for scale. But look at that middle section. Here's a close-up. Here's a close-up of them. These are called laminations, sedimentary layers. Do you remember I said the standard interpretation is 1 per year? Well, in that middle band of sediment there are actually thousands of them. Did it take thousands of years to lay them down? No, they were laid down precisely on June 12, 1980, in just 3 hours as a result of the catastrophic events of Mount St Helens. There's another date there and another one at the top. All those banks of strata were laid down rapidly and catastrophically. When you go back to Mount St Helens today, there are canyons all over the place. You see this canyon? Can you see the little river running through it? That's called the North Fork of the Toutle River. And I'm sure when we look at that, again, because we've all kind of been evolutionized in some way, we look at that and think, wow, that little river must have ebbed and flowed over a long period of time and eroded that canyon. Called Engineers Canyon. For a very good reason. Army Corps engineers needed to divert water from nearby Spirit Lake, which had overfilled from the volcanic eruption. And they diverted water into what was just a little gully at the time, and they carved that canyon out in just a few months. And don't think the material was soft and kind of just washed away. The floor of the canyon is solid basalt. That's hard volcanic rock. And you can see what are called striations, which is like scouring where the rock has been stripped away by fast-flowing mud and water. And by the way, I don't know if you can see a little side canyon just going off to the side on the left-hand side. That's called Little Grand Canyon. Here's a picture of it. Not really that little, is it? But it's a 1/40th scale of the Grand Canyon. And I'd love to tell you that one took a few months, but actually that was carved out in less than 24 hours as a result of a giant mud flow. You notice there's a little river running through it now. Oh, and there's a river running through Engineers Canyon now. The canyon created the river. The river did not create the canyon. It's actually the opposite way around. The river has now found the lowest source, or the lowest area to run. So here's that geologic column I talked about. Where you see down the side, you're familiar with terms like, Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, the age of the dinosaurs. These represent eras of time represented by the rock strata. And then they claim that we find these fossils in them during those periods. So that's a record of biological evolution. And that's all representing hundreds of millions of years of Earth's history. But as I said, we know the rocks and the fossils can be formed quickly, particularly under catastrophic conditions. So if we put our biblical worldview glasses on today, can anybody think of an event in the Bible that may have laid down some of that geologic strata and buried billions and billions of creatures in the process? I'll give you a clue. It involves a lot of water. Thank you. The flood. The flood of Noah's time. Now, how long did Noah's flood last? How long were the waters upon the earth? Anybody know? No. Rained for 40 days and 40 nights. 1 year. Thank you very much. So think about this. If most of this geologic strata we see over the earth was laid down during the 12 months of Noah's flood, where did the millions of years just go? It's not there, is it? And if there's no millions of years, ladies and gentlemen, there is no time for evolution to happen. Now you know why creationists are dogmatic about the age of the earth, ladies and gentlemen. Such a key point. And as I mentioned, all that stuff I showed you there comes from Creation magazine. And again, I'm not here to sell you magazine. There's no advertising in it. There's a children's section in it. It's a lay magazine. We ask that you read it, leave it on the lunch table at work, share it with others. We get so many testimonies from people doing it that way. And I want to talk about the age of the earth, because this is the thing we kind of avoid. As I said, I was an evolutionist, so when I looked at the Bible, I thought I was really clever when I found this passage, 2 Peter 3:8, with the Lord a day's like 1,000 years. Wow, obviously those days in Genesis must be long periods of time. But then it says 1,000 years are like a day. So what does that mean? Actually, I was using a passage out of context, because that's talking about the patience of God, isn't it? It's not talking about creation. There are all these views. Just a handful here. People say, could never have been a global flood. We don't have global floods today. But the Bible's description indicates, we learn that Noah took around 70 plus years to build this massive ship, 3 decks. Why did he go to all that trouble and take all that time to build this big ship to escape a local flood? I mean, he could have immigrated off to another country in that time, right? Why were birds on the ark if the flood was local? Do you remember that? They kept releasing a dove and they kept coming back until they found dry land. Theistic evolution is the idea that God used evolution, right? He lit the fuse of the Big Bang, allowed survival of the fittest to take over, and took his hands off the wheel. Gap theory. People my generation, a bit older, this is very popular in the US still, it says, Genesis 1:1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and then they insert a gap of deep time. And they did that because theologians of the day believed that the rock layers represented millions of years of Earth's history. Okay? So they put a gap between verse 1:1 and 1:2 of Genesis. The framework hypothesis, that's sadly one of the most popular views in our colleges, our Bible colleges today, that Genesis is not meant to be taken as real literal history. It's just a kind of a poetic framework of truth so we can understand the nature of God and our need for salvation. But I want to spend some time on this one. It's called the day-age theory. It's the one that I used to subscribe to. And it's promoted today by a ministry called Reasons to Believe. I'm giving you a heads up. Dr. Hugh Ross, their ministry, we call them progressive creationists, they've ministered in Bible colleges here in New Zealand. And he says the word day in English, and the Hebrew term is yom, he says it can mean an indefinite period of time. And what he's trying to say is, therefore, those days in Genesis must be, millions or billions of years each. And he's actually correct. And I'll give you an example this morning of how we understand the meaning of words, particularly day, yom, from the context. So if I said to you, hey, great to be with you here this morning. This evening I'm speaking in another church. The evening and the morning I'm talking about represent a part of this 24-hour day. And if I said to you, hey, it took me 3 days to fly from Atlanta, Georgia to Auckland, New Zealand. How many 24-hour days does it speak about? Not a trick question. Thank you. 3. In fact, you don't even have to think about it. Because when I put a number, 3, in front of the word day, I've just defined the context for you. 3 days. It'll become clear now. If I said to you, I'd like to tell you a story about something that happened back in my father's day. How many 24-hour days have I just spoken about? Or what period of time? You can't know. It's undefined, isn't it? See, when you put a number in front of the word day, it's called an ordinal. I've defined the context. Evening and morning define the context parts of a day. Right? So, when we look at the book of Genesis, is there any context? Well, we start in Genesis 1, verse 5. Look at that. God called the light day. Darkness he called night. Evening, morning, one day. 3 definers of the context. But wait, there's more. Evening, morning, a second day. Evening, morning, a third day. Evening, morning, a fourth day. There's a pattern here, isn't there? Evening, morning, a fifth day. Evening, morning, a sixth day. 3 definers of the context mentioned 6 times over. When we look at the word yom, outside of Genesis 1, in the remainder of the Old Testament, look at this. Day and number, 410 times. Evening and morning without the word day. Evening and morning with the word day. All these variations of the word day, and it appears 523 times. And nobody ever questions any of those as anything but a 24-hour day. But why question Genesis? Well, scientists have shown the world to be billions of years old. No, they just interpret geology incorrectly. That's basically it, ladies and gentlemen. But there's a big theological problem if we try to add evolution and even millions of years to the Bible. Because you remember on the days of creation, God saw what he'd made and it was good, and it was good. And then day 6, very good. The Hebrew term there, you can see, is tov miod. And that means perfection, completion, finished. Now, the only place people try to put the millions of years in Scripture is before, obviously, Adam and Eve in those days or in gaps, etc. But the evolutionary interpretation of those rock layers is that it represents millions of years of death and pain and suffering upon the earth. So had Adam and Eve been stood on this fossil graveyard beneath them, and then God looks down at what he made and said, oh, it's all very good. Isn't there a theological problem there? Is death good? No, death stinks. It's an intrusion into God's perfect world. When we see bad things happening out there, when our loved ones die of cancer and so on, it should be a reminder to us that something is wrong with creation. It hasn't always been that way for millions of years. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. And here's one of those New Testament passages I alluded to, over 100 of them, referring back to Genesis. It says, therefore as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, in this way death came to all men because all sinned. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't be a Christian and believe in evolution. I certainly was, but I profess I was ignorant. I didn't know the theological problems. So let me just clarify again here. Even if you don't believe in evolution, but you try to add millions of years to the Bible, the millions of years comes from the rock layers. The rock layers have fossils in them. Fossils are dead things. You'd be putting death before the fall of man, Adam, in Genesis chapter 3. That becomes then a gospel issue, ladies and gentlemen. So should we take Genesis literally? Well, I often say if Genesis is not real literal history with a literal very good creation, with a literal Adam and Eve, and if sin did not literally enter the world through their actions, then here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. You and I don't literally need to be saved from anything. We are saved because of events that happened in history. That's why I said the New Testament authors built all their doctrine upon real historical events. It happened in real space and time. And we look to that for future events. In Revelation 21, look, it says, God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things have passed away. And look at this. Revelation 22 is the last chapter in the whole Bible. And it says there, talking about the New Jerusalem, there's the tree of life again. Did you realize that? And there shall be no more curse. What curse is it referring to? The one that entered in the Garden of Eden when the first people sinned. And I often say to folks who want to add millions of years of evolution, because this is about the restoration, the new heavens and earth. And if you believe God created over millions of years of death and suffering, are you looking forward to that in the new heavens and earth? In fact, I don't even think it takes 6 days. Because I read it and it says, and behold, I saw a new heavens and earth. How can he do that? Because he's the creator, ladies and gentlemen. He's the creator, the one that was before the universe. He created the universe, created time itself. That's the God that we sang about and worship this morning. You know, I mentioned some of those figures. I mentioned the Southern Baptists, for example. Their own surveys show that 88% of them are leaving, their young ones are leaving the faith. Assemblies of God, cross-denominationally, you have similar figures here, and we also have those in Australia. But you know what happens is I go out to churches and I talk to people about this, and they say, yeah, but my son, he can't wait to get to youth group on Friday night, and they love the Sunday school. And I have to be frank with you, we think we've got them for life. But then they get on to higher education, and then they're taught this anti-God philosophy, this foundational view that destroys the early chapters of Genesis. So I thought, well, people not believing me, so I took a small film crew and I went out onto university campuses around Atlanta. And you can look at the trailer, creation.com/fallout. And as I stood there with this small film crew, as students walked past, I grabbed them and I asked 4 questions. And the first question was, were you raised in the church or not? And if they said no, I let them move on. I wanted to talk to these kids who said they'd been raised in the church. And when I got them, the second question I said was, creation or evolution, what's true? That was it. And out of the hundreds of students I surveyed, only 5 said they still believed in biblical creation, ladies and gentlemen. These were kids who were raised in the church, in Christian homes. The third question, when you were at home, did your pastors, parents, leaders, anyone show you the wealth of evidence we have today to show that biblical creation might be true? And every student who was raised in a Christian home but now believed in evolution, every single one said they'd never been shown any information. Some of them laughed at me and said, what information? There isn't any. Once Christian kids. The 5 that still believed in biblical creation, every one of them had been shown information. And then the last question, do you still attend church? And all those kids who now believed in evolution, right, except for one young man, and we put him in the documentary to show we were not stacking the deck, no longer attend church. And the 5, they still attended church faithfully. So can you see that this is a major issue? In fact, I would suggest to you that this creation evolution issue, ladies and gentlemen, it's the issue of all issues facing the church today if we are to communicate the relevance of the Christian faith to the culture today. So I'm going to mention some of these resources that you can get. Our website, okay? If you haven't signed up for email news, you can have a last bite out there, but the lead article changes every single day. Set it as a homepage, have a look. Type in your questions in the search engine. We have 2 full-time information officers. One of them's based here in New Zealand. We get thousands of questions sent to the website, and they get sent out to our specialists and our PhDs to answer every one. It's an audited ticketing system. We answer every one. But simply the best resource you can get is Creation Magazine. People love it, and it's been going for over 40 years with never having accepted advertising for it because it's a glossy magazine. You give it to someone, they go, oh, nice pictures, I'll read that, and then bang, they get hit with information they've never heard before. Remember I said most people believe in evolution because that's all they've ever been taught. So again, that stuff I showed you today was from the magazine. But what about radiometric dating? Just as an example, here's a piece of volcanic rock. Now we know the age of the volcanic explosion when the rock was formed. When it solidifies, there's no more radioactive material going in. So the decay clock starts. So we know the age of it was 50 years, and we sent it off to a radiometric dating lab, and it came back with an age of 1.35 million years for a 50-year-old rock. Now, don't get me wrong, there's no conspiracy. They measure the amount of radioisotopes in it, but to determine an age, you have to make assumptions like how much was in it when it was formed. And they don't know. We don't know those things, and so that's why they often get the ages wrong. Boys and girls, check this one, a fossilized teddy bear. Anybody think that's millions of years old if fossils take millions of years to form? I've actually got one of these guys. They hang them in a cave in Yorkshire, England, and they become permineralized in just a few months. Okay? So when somebody thinks fossils take millions of years, okay, you could show them a picture like that. Information changes lives. It changed mine. I heard stuff I'd never heard before. This young man wrote to us and said, your work was very important for me becoming a faithful believer in the Bible. I was an atheist, convinced of evolution until a year ago, and I started to listen to those crazy young earth believers trying to disprove them. And here I am now. And this young man came up to me some years ago in a church in Australia, my first visit back to Australia, and he just kept saying, thank you, Mr. H, thank you, thank you. And then he started to get quite weepy and emotional, so I said, email me your testimony. And this is what he wrote. Thank you for your ministry. As a child, family friend bought me a subscription to your Creation magazine. I attended public schools where evolution is taught, but with the information provided to me through your magazine, my faith was never shaken by evolution. I'm now a Sunday school teacher, and my favorite topic is showing God's glory through creation. I attribute your magazine, a simple magazine, as a major contributor to the strength of my faith and my love of science. Thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, not to boast, because we have 7 offices around the world. We share an international testimonial database. We have thousands of testimonies like that. It's effective. It works. And today you can sign up for Creation Magazine. In a moment, the volunteers are going to pass around some sign-up sheets. But here's something we do only on ministry as an incentive for you to sign up today. If you sign up for the magazine, you not only get the print edition, but we're going to give you the digital edition as well. That normally costs extra. And it says there, share on 5 devices. Well, I'm one of the editors of the magazine, let me tell you. So share it with as many people you like, all right? Your children, colleagues at work, get it on their tablets, their smartphones, and they can read the information. So you get that for free today. And you get our monthly newsletters, and these are written here in our New Zealand office for New Zealanders, specific to what's going on in your country. So if you sign up for 1 year, you get the print version, and we're going to give you a free back issue today. So instead of waiting till it's posted, what happens is you can start reading a back issue of the magazine. You're going to get the free digital version. But if you sign up for 2 years, which is actually cheaper, we're going to give you a DVD to watch, a presentation by Dr. Carl Whelan, former CEO of the Australian Ministry, an expert on race and culture. Okay, so there's the science in there as well. Very, very uplifting and encouraging talk. And I'm going to give you a second DVD. And that's that documentary survey I did of college-age students in Atlanta. And later on in the documentary, besides those 4 questions, I asked them and I say, what was your best evidence for evolution? What is it that makes you so convinced evolution is true? You know what the number 1 answer was? Over 90% of them said the rocks and the fossils, the fossil record, the rocks and the fossils. And that is the easiest thing for us to explain, ladies and gentlemen. Because I often say to people, well, just think about it. If there was a global flood, what would you expect the evidence to be? Would you expect to see thousands of meters of sedimentary layers with fossils in them? Guess what we find? Thousands of meters of sedimentary layers with fossils in them. They say millions of years. We say Noah's flood. Who was there to see those layers laid down? The evolutionist? No. But Noah was. And he carried those documents that form the basis of our Bible with him today. So you can get that free. 2 DVDs with a 2-year subscription. So guys, come forward past that. You can see there. Make sure you tick 1 year or 2. Put your name and address. Make sure you put your email so we can give you the digital version. And then if you want to subscribe someone else, a child or a grandchild, put their address on the back and tear it off. Okay, make sure you take off the coupon, please, this time. Take it to the volunteers up there, and they'll give you your free gifts today. Let me show you something that we featured in Creation magazine. Dinosaurs, often the poster child for evolution. We're told there was this great age of dinosaurs 300 to 65 million years ago. Really? Well, if that's the case, how come we can find ligament in it? Flesh, blood vessels, red blood cells, and the material is still soft and stretchy. Do you think that red blood cells and flesh could last 65 million years? Do you think it could even survive 10,000 years? Of course not. And we have hundreds of examples of this all over the world. By the way, this comes from a secular magazine. That's where the data comes from. But you never hear it shouted about in the press. But that's one thing. But the next is even more surprising. Unfossilized DNA. In the nucleus of our cell, we've got this chemical hard drive, a molecule that is very, very unstable. Because once death occurs, it degrades very quickly. And we find this computer code for life in the bone cells of a Trex, for example. Could not even last thousands of years, ladies and gentlemen. It fits the Bible's time frames, and there's lots of evidence like that. The Creation Answers book, I'll mention a few resources while the clipboards go around. Could I just respectfully say, I think every Christian home should have a copy of this. The 65 most asked questions on creation evolution. Who did Cain marry? Where did all the races come from? Where did the water come from the flood? Where did it go? How do we see distant starlight millions of light years away, supposedly, if creation talks in thousands, not millions, for example? Now, a lot of our books, most of our books have free study guides. So you buy that book, print off the study guide online, and sit down and work through it with your family. And you can actually get that book for free, basically, if you buy this starter pack, an intro pack. Refuting Evolution, behind is the largest selling creation book of all time. Deals with basic high school science as a study guide, and you get a creation talk there as well. So basically 3 for the price of 2. Pastor mentioned that I'm the writer and producer and director of Evolution's Achilles Heels, the movie that was based on a more technical book of the same name. 15 PhD scientists who are experts in radiometric dating, biology, geology. You see, evolution makes predictions. If evolution is true, we should see X. And we go through it and show that evolution is not substantiated by the very predictions its theory makes. And these next 2 are 2 of my, and necessarily, my favorite books. They look like children's books. They're kind of adult books in disguise, because I get adults writing to me telling me how much they learn from them. But geology is the culprit for millions of years. So by sitting down and going through this with your children, you're putting the right set of glasses on them. You live in a pretty hilly country in New Zealand, and already when you drive through the road and you see those road cuttings on the side and you're seeing the layers, strata, stratification, evidence of Noah's flood. Hey, boys and girls, look at that. And you can point that out to them. There's a companion book about dinosaurs, one of the most exciting areas for Christians today because of the soft tissue and the DNA. And this is the Rolls-Royce of creation books. This is 800 pages. Would make a great gift for your pastor, hint, hint. It's a commentary on Genesis 1 of 11, okay, science, theology, and history. It's being used at seminary level. There's an adult book on geology. And I love this one because you can do this for home study, or if you've got Bible classes or home groups here, the Genesis Academy, 12 DVDs, and we put them in separate DVDs for a reason. So group number 1 can start with DVD number 1, and then you share it. And then there's a free study guide you download offline so you can work through it. So these are illustrated lectures. Probably my most popular talk is on DVD. It's called Why Does a Good God Allow Bad Things? The key is going back to Genesis to understand why we're in the mess we're in. I mean, why did Jesus come? He came to help helpless sinners, you and me, because of what happened back in the Garden of Eden. This is actually used in prison ministry in the United States. I've got one about the new heavens and earth. And this booklet I co-wrote is called The Creation Survival Guide, How to Graduate with Your Faith Intact. Remember I said we should be doing a bit more? This helps our young ones understand when you get to high school, when you get to university, this is what you're going to face. This is what your lecturers and teachers are going to say to you, and we try to preempt that. And lastly, Pastor mentioned my book. Why would a Christian write on a subject about aliens and UFOs? Well, guess what? It's evolution. Because life either evolved here on the earth or it was created, and when we look out in this alleged 14 billion-year-old universe, they presume that aliens have evolved on countless planets. And guess what? They could have evolved 1 million or billion years in advance of human beings, and that's how come they can build hyperdrive, warp drive spaceships, visit the earth, the stuff you see in Star Wars. But there is a more sinister aspect. Millions of people have been surveyed, and they believe that they've been abducted by aliens. And you know what? I've met hundreds of them. Something is happening to them, ladies and gentlemen, but I can tell you it's not aliens. And in the movie version, you will see firsthand the testimonies of some of these people who say that in their moment of terror, in their bedroom, when this little entity appears, they call out on the name of Jesus Christ, and it stops it in its tracks. What does that tell you about the spiritual nature of the phenomenon? And you can get the book and the DVD in a pack out there as well. All right, well, I always say I could talk for millions of years on the subject, but here we are. Let me leave you with this. 1 Peter 3:15, one of our favorite passages. We have so much information today, ladies and gentlemen. 30 years ago when I started, we didn't have a tenth of what we have today. We have more information in this crucial foundational area than at any time in the church's history. But tomorrow, people out there, they don't get to hear about it because creation is not allowed in the secular realm. 1 Peter 3:15. After that, it says to do this with gentleness and respect. And remember, you and I can't save anybody, but we are called to be a faithful witness. I just want to thank the church, thank my translator friend up there who's had to go at 100 miles an hour with me today. But thank you for having us. If you've got any questions, I'll be out there. God bless.
Thank you very much, Gary. It was just such an eye-opening message. And if you have any questions about creations, don't come and ask me. Ask them. I'm sure there are a lot of things in the website that can help you through. So I hope that we can spend some time understanding more about creation so we have better equipped to answer those who don't know Jesus Christ. So let's close with our blessing. May the grace of Jesus Christ, may the love of the Father and the fellowship and communion of the Holy Spirit be with us all. 愿耶稣基督的恩惠、上帝的慈爱、圣灵的交通和感动常与我们同在，从今直到永永远远。阿们。God bless you.